I'm not a doctor. I'm not offering medical advice. In this video, there are no suggested remedies of any sort. This video is not about medicine. This video is about logic, behavior of people, in some cases, a certain example or two. And all I'm doing is noting the stuff that floats to the top in my mind. But the topic here is logic. The topic is filtering the input to determine not only what concords with other stuff, what conflicts with other stuff, what concordances conflict with other concordances, etc., as well as the appearance of externally received, intentionally designed, logical themes. This is not the same as themes in a TV show or a song. We're talking about it in an information sense. There are three ways that a person can receive, and this is just offhand, there may be more, that a person can receive external intended packets of information like this. One is if you were taught, two is if you were tricked, and three is a subset of tricked that is mass, everyone has it, which can also be taught. So I guess there's four, but really there's two. Logic can constitute such a pattern as a concept. It is rational to lessen your sense of trust given repeated contradictions. At least the need to question and discern or define a process, a means by which that specific source or type of input can be filtered. It goes through the exact same filtration as everything else, but it does so in a completely isolated sense with the idea that it probably references itself, and it might overtly or subtly reference other things. For example, this may be a standalone complex and not something, what I'm about to describe may be a standalone complex and not necessarily something that has a devious plot behind it. In modern pop culture fandoms, oftentimes there are actors who play similar roles. This is a kind of like a typecast. Sometimes they only take certain roles. Sometimes the roles that a single actor plays across a spectrum of different unrelated properties creates a very unique archetype for a representation of that actor's face as, and body, I guess, as the role, or voice, depending. So you could say like all the things that Tom Hanks has played, or all the things that Keanu Reeves has played, or all the things that David Tennant has played. Now, among all of these, in some places it does seem like there's some intentional placement without explanation. And in other places, it's the actor's choice of what roles they wanted to take. And sometimes that has to do with the lines and the action and the overall movie rather than the character itself. But if it's a big name actor, then they're obviously chosen for, clout and as well as their ability, that they're going to make a scene and people are going to remember this. Then there's the real intentional, which is sometimes haphazard, sometimes not, sometimes accidentally exposing nefarious plots or whatever, or so it seems. One such thing would be the placement of Matt Smith as the Skynet representation avatar thing in a recent Terminator movie. I haven't seen it, but he plays the Skynet apparently. Well, he played the Doctor before that, and everybody knew him as the Doctor. Well, the Doctor already changes, so then your Skynet changes. This is if you have this culturally implanted in your brain. Well, these are all by more organic absorption. However, within that, there can be patterns. So this is one such filter that I have, is looking at things like that. And as little pop culture as I consume now, I barely have to use it. This stemmed originally from a hobby of just jokingly interconnecting all the different things that a person has been in, and oftentimes while viewing one property, referring to them by a completely different character's name as a joke. I find it hilarious. So, back to logic, to the filtration. I'm only aware of the fact that there's seeming patterns in who portrays what for purposes of control. Sometimes things coincide or overlap that are not as intended or have unintended consequences. In terms of what your mind presents to you when you're asleep and dreaming and not at all recognizant of what the process or the imagery is. A complete flow of information back and forth, mass calculation, without your consciousness in the way. How your brain processes things depends on what your filters are as well, because that shapes what it takes in. So, this is like how you suspend disbelief between watching a fictional content and watching something that is nonfiction, or having to suspend disbelief in something that is supposedly nonfiction. Unfortunate reality that we live in is that that's a thing too. If there's a lot of contradictions, you have a hard time trusting. If there's constant back and forth, eventually it's like, okay, we all need to step back and reassess. And if the party that keeps flipping back and forth, floundering and rationalizing and not making sense, refuses to self-check, then under normal circumstances, a person would simply disregard them. And if it was a person in a position of authority, someone else within their authority system, whether it's a job or whatever, would have them replaced. So I think maybe that's what we need is clearer heads at the medical authorities of the world, for an example of a real world version of what I'm talking about. Peer-reviewed science has not changed that quickly. They're using excuses based on things that a rational person would normally accept. This is what is called sophistry. This is a plausible sounding basis which is ultimately proven to be fallacious. Based is in, when something is based in reality, that's what people mean when they say based. You've got facts and data on your side, and especially so if you acknowledge that yes, these things can change, but there's a certain standard by which you have to be willing to swap the one figure for the other. And what they would say, for the sake of argument, you can process something hypothetically without accepting it into your belief structure, thinking in abstract, I guess. That relates to a lot of other things about a person's ability to think in abstract and at what age they develop it, and what things are put into their brain before that point, which may contain abstracts. Eventually, it's like you take a step back and whatever's flip-flopping is doing it right in front of you, and you're just like, okay, this would be objectivity rather than subjectivity. You are pulling yourself out of the flip-flop and going, all right, this thing is moving too fast. That's how I came to understand something was amiss that I needed to see a doctor about, I'd say about 15 years ago now. The recognition that I had to step back from whatever was happening and be like, what the hell is this? It was bipolar. Most people that have bipolar are in denial because of the way the delusion works and because it's just a pattern over time that can be superstitiously believed to be a series of cause and effect that is not actually related. Whatever causes mood swings is not necessarily related to your day-to-day behavior, although triggers can certainly send you tumbling or set you off, moving upward. But it always has a pattern that it goes to. This is another filter that I have. I'm not bragging, I'm saying these are things that I've created simply by thinking and hashing out the specifics of these kind of things. Sometimes you can write down on a piece of paper and turn it into a decision tree or make a logic puzzle out of it, like a crisscross. Check off what has similar features or check off what is related to what and see what it looks like. So being a person who's capable of thinking in this way, this is, I can deduce, I can analyze, I can meta-analyze, collate, all these things with information. And it's all dependent on the quality of information. So one of the things you're looking at is the method of the peer-reviewed study that you're looking at legit? How detailed are their notes? Where is their overall graphing in comparison to their conclusion? Are there areas that they cherry-picked or omitted? And you can look at the sample size. You've heard me talk about this before. According to Sean, the actual Justice Warrior, who apparently is a bit of a math savant himself, seems like from the way he acts, he's kind of on spectrum, which is totally cool. Superpowers. According to him, as low as 1,000 or 2,000 sample size can render a useful sample of society. A couple thousand. So, you've heard me complain about anecdotal before. Unless you have enough single small studies to form a sample, a decent sized one, you don't have anything but a collection of anecdotal. If a particular individual is using the same source that contains all of this conflicting information in varying stages and degrees of quality of analysis and empiricism, if they're just constantly going back and forth on it, then they're doing it intentionally. Now the thing is, some of these people seem to be doing that intentionally. And others are just going with it. An example of this would be, there was a meme of a person and a non-player character, and the non-player character argues for A. This is, with A you don't need B. If you don't have A, you need B. And then the next one, well, we've now been told that we need A and B. And the other person goes, okay, so if A works, why B? And if B works, why A? And the NPC just gets angry. Normally in real life, this does not occur like this. people might get upset or angry, they might storm off or just, whatever. But in a somewhat stage setting, possibly a real life occurrence, one of these official authoritative types, the White House spokesperson, the press secretary, was pressed on exactly this question and did exactly the NPC thing back and forth. And the justification for each was because that's what the expert's guidance says. So they're just blindly following the expert's guidance. Never attribute to malice what can be explained by incompetence. There are malicious people working in and amongst the incompetence. Perhaps the malicious people are the real cause, but most of what's going on is incompetence. These are people who are not giving it any thought. They're just taking what they're told and doing it. And we're talking top-level government people, not just random average Joe or Jane. As such, the current chaos warrants taking a step back and saying, before this chaos, what was the word? Since this chaos, has anything significantly come up to demonstrate a major change in that knowledge? So far, this has not occurred. There are pieces of misinformation being distributed by the government from the White House on the news. The local government takes it up because somewhere in the state government, unless they've got an agreement that they're just not going to do that. You've heard me speak about the previous 273. I think it's up to about 300. There's been a slight uptick on the average daily deaths, rolling 7 to 13 days depending on your source. Longer period of time renders a slightly smaller average too. So a 7-day versus a 13-day, 7 days is going to seem higher. The infection rate among the population is low. The ratio of vaccinated persons having the infection and being hospitalized versus non-vaccinated is not as advertised. I can't quote those statistics. I mean, I could be able to on this channel and get away with it for a while, unless somebody decides to report me for some sort of medical misinformation. But it's one of those things where they've gone back and forth, they've canceled people on both ends of it. You can recognize that one number is higher than another number. And it is not as was promised with the product that was given or sold. Simultaneously, these expert authorities who work for the government, who inform everyone else, are making the claim still that it's safer, that it works. They are using this new highly contagious variant, which is much, much less severe. Hospitalizations are far lower in its entire wave and will be for its entire wave because that's how straining works. But if not A, then B, and if A plus B, because error, divide by 0. Filters, remember, this is about logic. I still personally have yet to see any reason, in the real literal sense of the word reason, a rational argument with conclusive or at least compelling proof that that variant is not simply the straining in process. There may be another variant or two after that before it completely is a non-issue. And each time it will likely get more people because the previous one barely spread. It was really not as communicable as they made it out to be, and the main vectors of transmission were mucous membrane contact, not respiratory droplets. That was the 5 to 15% of all spread, as far as the chance of spread. And you've got the others that there were people that could be in close contact with others and not realize that they're getting a higher viral dose through sexual contact. That's the highest loads. You're hearing viral load in the news now. The highest viral load has been and has not seemed to have changed in the mucous membranes, especially in excretory system and reproductive system. Because those contain mucous membranes. The respiratory part gets around because it is tiny. It's like 0.125, not the 0.3 that the mask has 95% stoppage of. By straining it, it becomes weaker. Death becomes a non-issue. And herd immunity becomes an easy thing. And again, if you look at the locations with the highest rates of hospitalization, you either find people in totally in the wrong, like in the case of the nursing homes in several states, or you find places where everybody followed the rules, masked up, kept their distance, weakened their immune systems, did absolutely nothing to stop the spread. In fact, may have helped, on top of the other illnesses that also compromise your lungs. And they canceled the doctors that at the very start were saying, this is bad for our immune systems, we should just let it take its course and watch. It won't be as bad as they say, based on the numbers we already have. The majority of the trauma and the drama and the damage done was done by the process of locking down, of destroying the economy, of trapping people, isolating people psychologically. That's where the real damage has been done. That those doctors who were right, who got canceled, if that advice had been followed instead, we'd probably be booming right now. To the moon. So the best way to understand how to get by is, as long as nobody's pushing mandates on you, you're fine. If they are pushing mandates on you, you need to talk to the people that are enforcing the mandates and saying, okay, are you just following the rules because you're told to follow the rules, or would you like to see what this actually says? And if, I would hope that cooler heads are prevailing in other places where folks are seeing that they're like, okay, what they're saying is happening is not what is happening. And the actual science that their own website has up contradicts what they're saying. So, do we listen to the spokesperson because they're paid more, or do we listen to the studies? And the studies with empirical evidence and objectivity and hopefully a clean method say the opposite. Which are we supposed to believe? I would say go with the science. That's about all I got. The video is about done here. The mouthpieces are contradicting the actual studies. The studies are what you should be paying attention to. And if you dig into them, unless you really are low vocabulary or have a learning disability, you should have no issue being able to figure out what they're saying. There's oftentimes very clear language. You may just get confused by chemical names or something. It's really easy to read studies.